I know you lost a dear one.
I was dreading this question. They are absolutely bombarded by images and visuals, and there's so much choice.
Yeah.
And choice is great, but sometimes it can be very confusing. It is really damaging if you don't know how to be able to shield yourself and put some circles around yourself to say, okay, enough. And we lost him to mental health.
I feel like giving a big hug.
Talking about these kinds of things is hard, but we believe talking about this kind of thing is where we need to go.
Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin by talking about your origin story. So if you can share your life story with us, that would be amazing.
Life story. Born in Edinburgh many years ago. Then we moved up to Aberdeen as a family. I consider Edinburgh my home. Proudly Scottish.
Right.
And went through normal school. Always chastised for looking out the window rather than looking at my books.
Yeah.
A little bit of a dreamer. Discovered music, partly through a love of music. My parents used to have great parties.
Yeah.
We used to think of them as the Rat Pack of where we used to live. I remember parties with martini and champagne and the Rat Pack music, Sinatra and Dean Martin, all that stuff.
Wow.
So that kind of got me into music. And then one day there was a knock at the door from some friends. I was about 15 years old. And they'd just been down to the beach in Aberdeen to see a rock band. And they came back and said, we want to start a band. And so one of them said, I want to be a singer. Someone else said, I want to be the bass player. Someone said, I want to be the guitarist. And I said, well, I'll be the drummer then.
Yeah.
Never played drums in my life. But I did notice that I used to tap, and I still do. I tap all the time.
Right.
So I my first drum kit was a cardboard box against the garage door.
Yeah.
Then I hounded my parents to get a real drum kit, small drum kit.
Yeah.
And actually I just found I had a natural affinity to it. So that became my passion, my obsession, drumming. And I then ended up in the music scene in Aberdeen and kind of North Scotland and joining bands. And I was always the youngest in the band. And that kind of progressed to a point where I joined a band and we toured a lot around Scotland. And then we got a record deal and we moved down to London. I thought I was only coming down for 6 months. That's what I told my parents. 30, 40 years later,
right,
I don't know, whatever. I'm still here. So I was very innocent and naive, but came down and just London just completely took me over, inspired me, and I, coming from not so much Edinburgh, but from Aberdeen, where I'd lived for the latter part of my younger years.
Yeah,
it's just amazing, and it really opened my my eyes to everything, and I became very inspired by kind of things outside of ourselves. So I became quite inspired by religion, which I'd never really been inspired by before. Not inspired, but interested and drawn to it.
Right.
We had a manager. We then met with two Glaswegian sisters who were a force of nature, well known down here in the party scene and clubs and with celebrities, etc. in London. And they took over managing the band, and they were staunch Catholics. So I was drawn to that, and I used to go to all of these different, ceremonies with them and church and things. And I was drawn to. I was drawn by the incense. I was drawn by the sounds and everything.
Sure.
And then that drew me into kind of other things like psychology and stuff. So I a very short time, my mind really opened up when I came down to London, and it changed me profoundly. So I carried on doing music. That particular band split up, as they always do.
Obviously,
the pavements aren't paved with gold as they ever are. But I carried on doing music. I did session work with other bands and artists, and then I found the band, which I thought was going to be my destiny. It was when you meet three other compadres
Yeah.
that we felt we were the Beatles or something, or Oasis,
Right.
but before the time, and that was just the most amazing 3 or 4 years. It was just great. It was artistically and self contentment.
Right.
That band split because the singer went off and had an affair, as they always do.
Yeah.
And I just carried on with music, and then I met my partner Jules at the time, and after one of our gigs, and we just kind of hit it off and danced, and fell in love. And she was studying complementary medicine, and so I became very interested in that complementary medicine, and she was studying aromatherapy.
Oh, wow.
I then became interested in the oils, the essential oils that go with that. And then that took my life into a different phase of both music, but complementary medicine, and very much an interest in Oriental philosophy and Eastern philosophy.
Wow. Okay.
And then I started a long and continued journey to this day of training in martial arts and Tai Chi and various other art forms. So we started a business in complementary medicine, and I trained professionally as a aromatherapist and Oriental bodywork practitioner with acupressure and kind of Oriental diagnosis.
Yeah.
And then we set up a small business with products, complementary products, complementary health products. And then that developed as we then started a family. We had our daughter, and we worked very much in pregnancy and labour and early childhood, working with hospitals and introducing complementary medicine into hospitals. And then we continued, and I then set up another business with a friend of mine who is a really well-known hairstylist at the time, worldwide campaigns everywhere.
Wow.
So we set up a natural organic hair care brand.
Oh, wow.
It never materialized into longer hair, but it was a fantastic product called Hedonism, and we had a lot of fun with that. We looked like a couple of builders, but we never paid for any advertising.
Yeah.
But we were in all of the top magazines because we just hassled the beauty editors, kept knocking on the door saying, let us talk to you. And once we were in, they loved the concept of a natural product, beautiful product, worked really well, great packaging, all, again, quite ahead of its time as far as natural and organic packaging, eco packaging.
Right.
And then, that evolved, and we were selling lots of places. Then we had our son, Cal, and so that again that takes you in another phase of life.
Sure.
And then I was asked by a friend. This is kind of moving on there a few years. I was asked by a friend to come into a university in London and help with a project. And it was a bit of downtime for me with the businesses that we had, small businesses. And I said, yeah, why not? I didn't go to university. I have to declare that.
I was going to ask, you haven't mentioned university, and you work at a university now, so I'm curious.
And I don't hesitate in telling people now I work in a university, as you know, but I didn't go to one. And that has its pluses and minuses.
Of course, yeah.
But he asked me to come and work in that university, run a project, and I went in, and after a short period of time, I realised that there were lots of invitations or requests from outside. Can we have a student, or can we have some students to do this or do that? And I thought, oh, great, that's a fantastic experience. But at the time, I was very frustrated that they were being kind of used a little bit and not being rewarded for the work. So I conceptualized a kind of agency within that university, and I think because I didn't go to university, I didn't know how to take the word no, or we've never done it that way before. So I just kept knocking on doors of the exec offices at that university and said, can we get some funding? This is what I want to do. I want to get our students working for businesses, but them getting paid for it. And they said, well, we've never done that before. So, well, that's no reason for us not to do it. So I set up an agency in that university and ran that for about 4 or 5 years, and then other kind of research development projects. I got to a point where there was a bit of a ceiling of what I could do there, and there was a little bit of a conflict. So I left that university and spun that idea out, and then set up my own business or own agency, which was taking students and graduates from different universities and working on real projects for real clients, from UK and US startups to Apple to EMI, whatever, a whole bunch of things. And then fast forward, I kind of got a little bit bored with that. Not bored, but just I kind of ran out of steam a little bit.
You have to evolve.
You have to evolve.
Yeah.
And then someone said Middlesex University is where I work now.
Yes.
I was looking for someone to come in and advise on employability.
Right.
So I took that, and again, fast forward 3 or 4 years, through I think just putting my hand up and saying I'll do that, and I want to do that, and I really want to make a difference.
Yeah.
I'm now the director for the careers and employability at Middlesex. So if you've been kind of listening to that, you'll probably gather there's a thread of I start lots of things, sometimes don't finish them, and that's if there's a fault, and there are many. But if there's a fault,
I think everybody has faults. Everybody is
Yeah.
unique. I think it's the journey that you have, right, and that makes you the person you are.
Yeah.
And I think everybody has a very interesting story, and everybody can teach us from whatever journey they've been through. Start, stop, continue, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask you is, you work with a lot of youth, not just now, but obviously at Middlesex University, but previous to that as well. And mental health is quite a serious issue, a lot more post-pandemic, but it always has been, right? What have you discovered? What are the themes that you've discovered, generally speaking, in the youth when it comes to mental health?
I think, I'll trot out which, one of the things I think is quite obvious is the impact of social media and the impact of this persona that young people feel they need to have to present themselves to a world which is, slowly becoming their world. They are growing into this world and making their place in this world. And they are absolutely bombarded by images and visuals and you should not. Your lifestyle should be this is success. And I know from personal experience that actually is really damaging if you don't know how to be able to shield yourself and put some circles around yourself to say, okay, enough. And I think it's a very confusing world. I'm not old enough. I may look at it, but I'm not old enough to remember some of the big industries that were around, steel making and coal and all those kind of things. Or in Scotland with oil, where for a while there was kind of a set path. You did this, you went to college, you went to university maybe, and then you kind of went into industry and it was set. You kind of saw, and maybe it was in the family tradition. We don't have that anymore, and there's so much choice. And young people can see the world on this device.
In your hand.
And choice is great, but sometimes it can be very confusing. So I think
it's a spiral that you go into, right? Because you can't decide, because there's so much information, and you get lost in it, and then maybe you get anxiety because of that. The anxiety is probably that's the result that I see in most commonly in young people that I work with and come into contact with. Anxiety, and anxiety is really, a concern about the future, an uncertainty about the future. Depression is our pain from our past and our reflection, and not really knowing how to deal with that. True.
Anxiety is the future, and ultimately, I guess, going back to my Oriental philosophy, we want to be in the middle. We want to be mindful of where we are presently.
I know you lost a dear one during a pandemic last year in 2021. Your son. Tell us about Cal. What kind of a person he was. I know you've told me before, but I think our audience would love to hear. And what happened, if you can share, please.
No, of course, very, very happy, and well, in the circumstances, happy to talk. Always happy to talk about Cal.
Yeah.
So Cal was he was my best friend. He is my hero, but he was my son. He was, and I'm saying this not as a biased father, but I'm genuinely saying this because of what we hear from others in his peer group and community. He was and is a bright, shining star that lit up anyone who had met him for the fleetest of moments. And he had this ability to elevate your spirit, elevate your self-worth. And he was drawn to those who struggled. Those friends in school were sometimes those kind of outliers slightly. He was drawn to them, and he would bring them in and develop their confidence. And we've learned that, contrary to what he would always say, he was genuinely the one that everyone in the secondary school looked up to, both older and younger, and they followed his fashion and things like that. And he was so not that way. But he exuded something that was really quite special, and we lost him to mental health and depression and anxiety on the 7th of January in 2021, and he left to go to the shop, which is 2 minutes up the road, and gave us all a hug. And we were a big hugging family. We were a super tight family. Our daughter and my wife Jules. Super close, and everyone always tells us that we are a family that they all looked at as being, this tight unit. And we know that Cal had some issues, and we worked with him on those, and we always looked to support. We talked openly about depression and anxiety. And he hugged us to go to the shop, which was normal. We hug all the time, and he didn't come back. And he had taken his own life that evening, but we didn't know until the Saturday evening. So we had 2-3 days of frantically looking for him, community looking for him, friends, and the talking about these kinds of things is hard,
of course.
But we believe talking about this kind of thing is where we need to go, obviously with some consideration.
Sure.
But we couldn't recover Cal for 5 weeks because of the circumstances in which he had taken his life.
Right.
Those 5 weeks were painful.
I understand.
And I would walk where we'd been told he had gone. I walked every day. And in some vain hope of finding him. And in those 5 weeks, that's when, as a family, we came together, we pulled together, we were hurting, we were pained, and we were compelled and committed to do something in Cal's name, because he was such a tour de force in our lives, and we needed to, I guess, selfishly for ourselves initially, keep him in our hearts and minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. But also, I am obviously sorry for the loss. I obviously know about this since 2021. I remember talking on emails, and then I think then one of your colleagues told me, "Oh, you're off for a few months or a couple of months." I didn't really. You don't really think about the worst thing ever, right? When someone says, "Oh, I'm taking a month off or 2 months off," you might be taking a career break. I'm optimistic that way. But when I actually found out, I was heartbroken.
Yeah,
and when I look at the young generation and the mental health issues, suicide has become so much more common than it was pre-pandemic or in the last 10 years. It's increased a lot. Do you have more have you discovered more sort of stats or more information from the government or
the stats are renewed every year, but there's always a bit of a lag as to when they're reported. And I think the other thing to mention is that actually we know of certain circumstances where suicide is not reported as suicide.
Right.
And we know also from our, since Cal going, conversations we've had with authorities, that not all acts of suicide are, as I say, are recorded as suicide. So the stats are scary enough. You know, I think in England and Wales last year, there were over 6,000.
Wow.
That's one every 90 minutes.
Wow.
It's the biggest killer of males in under the age of 49. 75% of suicides are male.
Wow.
And it is a tsunami, and I think it will only increase given coming out of the pandemic, but also the cost of living crisis that we're coming through. So it's you know, it doesn't go away and it doesn't get any less.
No.
So it's, you know, it's a, you know, mental health with young people is, I think, such an important thing for us now.
How much is loneliness a part of all this? And especially if you add pandemic to the mix. Did you think that was part of the reason for Cal's taking that decision?
Yeah, I think without a doubt, there were three key factors, I think, with Cal. In the 2 years previous to him taking his life, two of his peer group had also taken their life, two other young men who he knew and who he again had reached out to and looked to support, but they had really quite challenging circumstances and really were quite troubled. And COVID and pandemic and loneliness is definitely was a contributing factor. And when we started to kind of reach out to Cal's peer group, his friendship group, again, this was through the pandemic, so it was, you know, we had to be conscious of that.
Sure.
What became really evident was the loneliness.
Right.
But the loneliness, and also on top of that, almost the lack of support, the inability for them to know how to support each other in a situation where one of their friendship group has taken their own life, as in case of Cal. So, you know, what we found was that his peer group, shocked about Cal going, kind of retreated back into their bedrooms, into their flats, not knowing how to communicate, how to support each other, and with the pandemic also having the limitations of
it's
that.
escalated, right? Because you're sort of like removed from everything and you're sort of going back to your own, I guess, processing world.
Absolutely.
And with the pandemic, you're pretty much stuck in your house, on your room, or wherever you are, right? So you can't even go outside for a walk sometimes, right?
No, exactly. And just not knowing the language. How do I?
What do you say?
How do I reach out to my friend and saying, "How are you? Are you okay? How are you coping with this? You know, can we talk?" They didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So
what do you think? What do you think you know, like if you're ill or if there's an emergency, there's a phone number, right? And I know Calzy Foundation is there and trying to kind of influence some of that and increase awareness of this. Can you talk to us about what do you think the government should do more of?
It's a really good point. We know from our own experience as a family impacted by Cal leaving us, where we have had deeply distressing days as a family, individually and together, where we actually think there is no hope. I'll be perfectly honest, you know, it feels like that. Why should we carry on without Cal? And when we've reached out to the traditional, or I guess what is the support that is put to you, in most cases we've had not a great experience,
right?
And either a phone is not picked up, a response is not a promised response does not come back, or in the case of couple of kind of crisis helplines that are kind of nationally run, if you like. You're 10 minutes into the conversation, and they're asking you to go and get your NHS number.
That's
Now,
just ridiculous.
For someone standing on the edge of a track or a bridge or in a really
Every second
stressful
counts,
situation,
right?
well, they're not going to do that.
What can we do as a society? So imagine you're in front of Liz Truss, our new PM, or our new king. What would you ask them? What's the one immediate thing we can all do, or the government can do now to help someone?
Well, through the Calzy Foundation, one of the things we are doing is campaigning to have a 3-digit number, a distinct 3-digit number for emergency mental health. So
I'm surprised there isn't one already.
There's not. I mean, you have 999, you have 111.
Sure, yeah.
And that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
If you go to someone, if we'd gone, I mean, we're Cal, and kind of went. Ultimately, there were signs. Call this number, but it was a long number. If you put someone who's really in a very stressful situation, high anxiety, if you say, here's some helplines, it's just not going to work. We know that from our own experience and from talking to others. So we're campaigning for a distinct 3-digit emergency mental health number, like 555, not 111. Now, they've just done it in America. They've launched 988 in America.
Right.
And they've done it as a distinct number because they've actually understood that you can't lump mental health in to 111.
Yeah.
It's too confusing. It won't work. The psyche of people for 111 is, I've got I hurt my shoulder, or I'm feeling sick.
The minor issues, essentially.
Yeah, it's where you go before 999.
Before it becomes an emergency. Yeah.
And so we're campaigning for this distinct number. Now, what we want that number to do, this is what I'd be saying to Liz Truss, and we do have MPs backing for this so far.
Amazing.
We have been working with MPs, and we're continuing to do that. But what I would be saying to her is that if you are really serious about mental health, and you need to be serious about mental health in this current climate,
yes,
because we know all the cracks. I mean, my daughter fell through a crack in the support just this week. Yeah. So our suffering continues. Yeah. But it was a clear example of where these cracks lie. If you are really serious about supporting mental health in this country, there are a number of things you should do, but one of the things is this emergency mental health number. Yeah. As a triage, one number, it becomes in our psyche the same way as 111, same way as 999. I call up. I don't need to make that decision from a page load of numbers.
You don't want to go through all that. You just want to talk to someone.
I just need to get someone that's going to pick it up 365 days a year, 24/7. Hi. Some suitable questions, triage. Okay, this is what you need to do next. Yeah. If it's an emergency, it's 999 and the services are called out. Yeah. If it's less acute, then here is the support. Here is when it's open. This is what you should do next. Yeah. Yeah. That first question that someone gets asked in that situation is so important. So that's why it needs to be separate from 111.
I feel like giving a big hug, and I will after this episode.
We always need.
Yes, we always, hugs. And you're a hugging family, so it works. You mentioned family and friends, right, and colleagues. A lot of people get affected after something tragic happens like this, right? What would you say to people right now, like families or friends who are noticing certain behaviors? What are those behaviors? How can someone tell that someone's going through something serious, and before it leads to something tragic, they can save that person?
There's a whole range of behaviors that happen, and that really is very much dependent on the person, their environment, the relationships between the family. Yeah. So it's difficult to pin down, kind of set ones, but as an example, when someone becomes a little bit more withdrawn, maybe break some of the habits that they had. We noticed in the last 2 or 3 days before Cal left us, He's got a husky called Rocco,
Yeah.
beautiful husky. He was in love with it. It's like they
Yeah.
were, you know, together the whole time. Couple of mornings he just didn't walk, he didn't walk, Rocco. And he was
Right.
like, oh, I wonder, okay, so, you know.
They can sense it.
We were a little
Yeah.
bit concerned.
Right.
So that kind of withdrawn, being maybe a little bit unsure, lacking confidence, not wanting to talk maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, breaking some of the habits that you kind of know them for. And so I would say to families, you know, in who would be maybe in a similar situation that we were. We were really on top of it. We felt at the time we were on top of it. We were very close. We talked a lot.
Right.
But we just didn't know the depth of his pain.
I think you make a really important point, because it's, if someone's suffering from something like a very serious depression or a serious anxiety, you constantly saying and, you know, asking and leaning can also can actually add to the problem, right? But then you don't want to be doing too little either. So it's finding that right balance can be quite tricky. Did you
absolutely right? That's, you're spot on with that. And if we look back now at Cal and with our daughter, and then the other conversations we've had in what we do now with the Calzy Foundation with other families, it's a fine balance between, come on, you know, life is good. You've got a whole life ahead of you. Let's get it going. Let's try this. Let's do that. That can create its own issues. It can feel that there's too much pressure, and if I look back now, and you know, my wife would say the same. We would just sit down with Cal on the sofa beside him, and just hold his hand and say, "It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay."
Not, but okay. So what can we do to move you on? How do we move you out of this? Because
sometimes you just need to be there without actually doing anything.
It's just being there, just listening, and letting them know that. Take your own time.
Yeah.
Take your own time, and know that there is the support if you want it around.
If you could go back in time and tell something to Cal.
I was dreading this question.
I'm sorry to ask this.
No, it's a good question. It's a really good question, and I've been asked it before. I have two things. One is out of the context of our circumstances, and this would be my advice to any young person is find your purpose, find the thing that floats your boat. Don't be compromised by pressures, by expectations.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, at some point, you will get caught with your pants down or your curlers in, and it becomes false.
Right.
Find the purpose, and that's what will get you out of bed and stimulate. And you'll fail, and it's great to fail.
Which is okay.
You just fail, and you get back up.
Yep.
But find your purpose. And we did that with Cal. We continued to encourage him and you know, give him an opportunity for music and fashion and art and things. In the context of Cal, and again, this is where it's good to talk. And I thank you for
of course
talking, you know, for allowing me to talk about this. This might seem strange, and it's very specific, I guess. But I would say, don't get on the bus. That's that line. It's probably only relevant to something, you know, to the circumstances. But it would be, don't get on the bus.
Don't get on the bus. Yeah, understood. It's difficult to wrap up this conversation because it's such an important topic. So I'm going to ask, but I have to wrap up. We talk about young people, and we've all been young. So if you were to go back in time and advise yourself as a younger self, what would that be?
Keep drumming.
Keep drumming.
Keep drumming.
Keep drumming.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
It's probably what I'm best at.
Keep going. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alan. Very much appreciate you coming on this and sharing very personal stories. My message to the young people is the same as you have given us, which is, if you are drowning, just ask for help.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people around you to help.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to give you a hug.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much.